Garry Kasparov vs. the World, 1999. The World team came well equipped with 4 young chess stars to suggest moves for the World team: Adrian Baccarat, Florin Felekin, Irina Krush, and Elizabeth Petz. Also, Grandmaster Daniel King was recruited to provide a running commentary, often acting as a fifth advocate. And a bulletin board was used to organize the team's discussion of moves. The World team also benefited from an organization known as the Computer Chess Team, founded to analyze each possible line and make recommendations to the World. It was hoped that these advantages would raise the level of play. Kasparov played his first move, e4, on June 21, and the World team voted by a 41% plurality to meet him on his home turf with the Sicilian defense. And after c5, knight f3, d6, instead of the more ambitious d4. Immediately opening the game, Kasparov played bishop b5, which is more likely to result in a closed game. Kasparov apologized to the World team for this, but excused himself for the upcoming World Championship. The game continued with bishop d7. Bishop takes d7. Here, how should black play? Knight takes d7. Or queen takes d7. About 3% of viewers wanted black to play knight takes d7, but were outvoted by those who thought black's queen was safe on the light squares with white's slight bishop off the board and thought black was stronger with its knight on c6. With c4, Kasparov solidified his hold on the d5 square by advancing the c pawn before developing his queen's knight, which joined the attack on d5 on the next move. The resulting pawn formation, the Morochi bind, is a strategy of cramping black's position. So how should black continue? The World team responded correctly by contesting for control of the d4 square. Knight c6, knight c3, knight f6. Here, slightly more popular today is d4, and after c takes d4, knight takes d4, queen e6, would now lose the queen. And d4 does allow 2 other queen sorties with queen g4. That's dubious. Or after c takes d4, knight takes d4, with queen g4. In the game white, castle. Now black must try to castle on its king side and can do it up by freeing its dark bishop to either the e or g files, rather than move the e pawn to e6, or e5, and have the dark bishop blocked by its d pawn. The World team opted to fianchetto its remaining bishop. So, g6, further contesting the dark central squares. So how should white play? Kasparov immediately broke up the center with his queen's pawn, d4, before the black bishop could come to bear. Following c takes d4, knight takes d4, bishop g7. The center was too hot for the white knight on d4, because the World team was threatening a discovered attack by moving the black knight away from f6, unmasking the g7 bishop. Exchanging knights on c6 would have been silly for Kasparov, as it would have brought a black pawn to c6, giving the World team greater control of d5. Instead, white must retreat with what move? Knight e2. According to opening theory of the time, black finally secured the opportunity to castle with queen e6. Interesting, a move which had never before been played in a recorded game. Krush discovered and analyzed the move, enough to get 53% of the vote. It was the turning point for the World team, not only because it increased Krush's stature and energized the World team, but also because it blew the position wide open and the queen was forking Kasparov's central pawns. Counter-attacking with queen b3 would have been met by castle. Queen takes b7, rook fc8, and the World team would have won back a central pawn with a favorable game. Here, after knight d5, queen takes e4, Kasparov made the following desperado maneuver with his knight to cause the World team to have double pawns. Knight c7, king d7, knight takes a8, queen takes c4, knight b6, a takes b6. Materially, the game was still even, but positionally it was perhaps Kasparov who was fighting uphill. And Kasparov rose to the challenge with what move? Knight c3. Yeah. Good move. For instance, it was tempting to harass the black queen and possibly fianchetto the white bishop with b3. But this would have invited the World team to switch wings and initiate a kingside attack with queen h4. Or, to blindly follow the rule, never move a piece twice in the opening when you can develop another piece with bishop e3. would have allowed the world team to play what move? Knight d5. Bringing the black knight to the square it most fervently wished to occupy. Kasparov's actual move. Knight c3. Contested d5. Somewhat blunted the effect of the black bishop on g7. And retained a compact, flexible position. Rook a8. Krush was maintaining an analysis tree, and continually updating with all the suggestions and refutations from the bulletin board. Not only did the analysis tree allow the world team to work with less duplication, it served as a standing, detailed argument for the correctness of the recommended move. Krush was facilitating two tasks simultaneously, discovering the good moves, and building a consensus that it was indeed a good move. She had become the center of all the cooperative effort of the world team. Even players of much greater strength began sharing their ideas with her, so that she would incorporate them into her analysis. What's the best pawn move? How should white play? a4. Directed at the maneuver rook a5. Because white has what move? Knight b5. Yeah. Good move. Paralyzing the black queenside. Simultaneously, Kasparov threatened a rook lift of his own via rook a3. Finally, a4. Prevented the world team's doubled b-pawns from advancing, making them future targets. The game remained very unclear and dynamic, but it suddenly appeared to be the world team which was fighting to retain its balance. Now how should black play? Four analysts made four different recommendations with Krush's suggestion winning the vote, hands down, with knight e4. Knight takes e4. Queen takes e4. Queen b3. e6. Queen takes b6. Knight d4. To make sure it was the weak double pawn which went missing. Or the more aggressive immediate knight d4. Allowing white what move? Queen takes f7. Kalifman, however, against the three other analysts' unanimous recommendation to play knight d4, found the extremely subtle move f5. And Krush took over the game, conveniencing the team to play f5. Yeah. Good move. Conceding the b6 pawn but at a price. If white continues with bishop e3, black could offer a queen trade with what move? Queen b4. And banked on the central pawn mass to be quite strong in the endgame. But once again, Kasparov once again found what powerful developing move with even stronger attacking possibilities. Bishop g5. How should black play? Knight d4. Or queen b4. Most favor knight d4. With the counter-attack, and this was the recommendation of both Felekin and Petz. Kasparov, up against much stiffer resistance from the world team than he had imagined possible, began to drop hints that he was effectively playing against the Grandmaster school, and not against the internet as a whole, but Move 19, among others, debunked the theory. The Grandmaster school recommended queen d4, while the bulletin board found a flaw in their analysis, and generally favored queen b4. The move essentially forced Kasparov to intensify his attack on the kingside. Note that a queen trade was strategically out of the question for white, as it leads to a favorable endgame for black. After queen f7, black can grab a pawn and protect its bishop with queen takes b2, daring white's rooks to occupy open files, but this would result in a lot of pressure on the e7 pawn and on black's king. So how should black continue? Queen takes b2. Or bishop e5. The team decided to protect its bishop and close the e-file with bishop e5. Although Kasparov did not fall for the simple trap of grabbing the h-pawn, queen takes h7. Because black has what move? Rook h8. Skewering white's queen and the h-pawn. Queen takes g6. Bishop takes h2. King h1. And here, what is black's strongest move? Queen g4. Gaining at least an extra piece. Was the first threat of the game for the world team and let Kasparov know he was in a game with chances for both sides. Kasparov opted for a simple defensive move which restored his threat to plunder the black kingside, with h3. And after rook takes a4. Rook takes a4. Queen takes a4. Queen takes h7. Bishop takes b2. Queen takes g6. Queen e4. Queen f7. Bishop d4. The game began to assume features of an endgame. White and black are now in the race to promote their h and b pawns, respectively. Queen b3. Bishop c5. Queen b1. The world team could not have accepted a queen exchange, bringing white's rook to life. but moving away the queen would allow rook e1. And suddenly the white pieces would be coordinating very well. To tie down the world team into a more passive position. In keeping with its play throughout the game, the world team found a sharp, active alternative in f4. Yeah. Good move. Which extensive analysis showed to be at least as good as bishop c5. However, Krush's recommendation on behalf of the bulletin board once again stood alone against the unanimous recommendations of the other three analysts. In an extremely close vote, f4 edged out bishop c5 by a margin of less than 1%. The world team blocked off Kasparov's bishop from its natural post on e3 and threatened to generate an attack on the white king after all. Queen b1 could be met by bishop takes f2, while queen d1 would run into what move? f3, and starting the pawn race with h4 would be answered with what move? Knight e5. With attacking play for the world team, Kasparov instead opted for a simple and natural move. Queen f7. And after bishop e5, how should white continue? After the world team defended its f-pawn, Kasparov decided to launch the race to queening with what move? h4. b5. h5. Queen c4. Black could not match the march of white's h-pawn by playing b4, because the white queen still guarded the b3 square, which black would have to lose a tempo to guard before advancing again. The move, queen c4, in contrast, did not lose a tempo, because Kasparov could not afford to trade queens in a way that would have undoubled the black pawns and given the world team a central pawn steamroller for the endgame. The alternative, queen e2, also might have held the fort for black, by offering to exchange the white h-pawn for the black f-pawn. However, as part of the trade, the bishops would also have come off, and none of the four analysts was prepared to trade the world team's lovely bishop for Kasparov's cramped one, not just yet. Kasparov elected to force a queen trade with what move? Queen f5. And following queen e6, the world team's responses were essentially forced. Queen takes e6. King takes e6. White breaks free his imprisoned bishop, opened the f-file for his rook, with what move? g3. As f takes g3. Creates connected passed pawns in a pure endgame. After f takes g3. The ensuing position is a sharp one for both sides, with 6 passed pawns in total. Here, as elsewhere in the game, the world team opted for counterplay. Bishop takes g3. h6. Bishop e5. h7. Bishop g7. Rook f8. b4. h8 promoting to a queen. Bishop takes h8. Rook takes h8. An extremely unbalanced endgame would have ensued, with Kasparov having a rook and bishop versus the world team's knight and 4 pawns. The central position of the black king might have been just enough to hold a draw for the world team. Instead, the world team opted for counterplay b4. This move caught everyone entirely off guard. Bishop d4 looked promising. However, after the game, Kasparov recommended bishop h8 as the best way for black to defend the position. Bishop f4. Bishop d4. How should white play? The world team was prepared to answer king g2 and king h2. But Kasparov stunned everyone, including the Grandmaster school, with what move? King h1. Yeah. Good move. It was not about improving white's position. The question is, what is black going to do? How should black continue? Knight e5. Or b3. Knight e5 is probably enough to hold the draw. However, they opted for pushing the b-pawn, influenced by Krush, so b3. After g4. The world team, having convinced itself that b2. g5. Knight b4. g6. Knight d3. h6. Knight takes f4. Would not be checked due to Kasparov's 35th move, and would therefore fail to hold the draw. Kasparov has connected passed pawns marching toward victory, supporting each other, whereas the world team needed the knight or possibly even the king to help promote the b-pawn. Furthermore, black's bishop is chained to guarding g1, where white's rook could support the g-pawn from behind while guarding the back rank. Notice how Kasparov keeps the black king from advancing, by controlling the dark squares with his bishop and the light squares with his pawns, a position which in some lines would have been sufficient to blockade the pawns. Now how should black play? b2, knight b4, or king d5. The immediate knight b4 would merely transpose. Krush duly recommended king d5. Baccarat and Felekin suggested b2. Pets favored knight b4. So the team played king d5. Yeah. Good move. This game, which had started in June, had now spilled over into September, longer than anyone had expected. Kasparov's two passers apparently required two black pieces to restrain, but the black knight could not cross over via e5. Because Kasparov would have simply exchanged the white bishop for it. g5. Therefore the bulletin board turned its attention to e5, driving away the white bishop and clearing the way for knight e7. But Kasparov had a slick reply with bishop c1. Yeah. Good move. His pawns would be so strong in this line that he could have sacrificed his bishop for black's b-pawn, particularly since the black bishop would be temporarily cut off from the h8 queening square. Also, in many lines where black does not force the white bishop to give itself up, it can reverse field with bishop a3, tying the black king to the defense of the d6 pawn. With its back against the wall, the world team found what move. And after e6, if white plays rook d1, black has what move? King e4. So the game continued with h6, knight e7, rook d1, e5, bishop e3, king c4, bishop takes d4, e takes d4. Kasparov's rook could not take the double role of guarding the home rank and forcing through the passed pawns against black's knight. Therefore the white king had to come out of its corner at last, with king g2, b2, king f3, king c3, h7, knight g6, king e4, king c2, rook h1. The world team needed to advance the d-pawn as well as the b-pawn, in order to get a second queen after Kasparov sacrificed his rook for the first one. The immediate push b1 promoting to a queen. Bad move. It loses after rook takes b1, king takes b1, king takes d4. It was merely to give the world team this opportunity to blunder that Kasparov marched his king to the center instead of straight forward. The white king arrived to assist the white pawns just as quickly with diagonal moves as with straight ones, and the diagonal moves gave it incidental threats in the center. Here, after d3, king f5. How should black play? Promote the pawn or play knight h8. With knight h8. Bad move. As black has a lost endgame after g6, d2, g7, d1 promoting to a queen. Rook takes d1, king takes d1, g takes h8, promoting to a queen, and b1 promoting to a queen. When black cannot engineer a perpetual check. In the game following b1 promoting to a queen. Rook takes b1, king takes b1, king takes g6, d2, h8 promoting to a queen, d1 promoting to a queen. The race to queen pawn ended in a tie. The position was not equal, though. Kasparov's far advanced g-pawn was an imminent threat to queen, while the world team's pawns were potentially liabilities as much as assets, since they could give the white king a modicum of shelter from threatened checks. The general plan of defense for the world team was to place its king favorably, so that Kasparov could not threaten a deadly queen trade, and then determinedly check Kasparov's king to prevent him from queening the g-pawn. In some lines the world team could gain counterplay by advancing its own pawns, but this was a secondary strategy. Queen h7. Threatening to gain tempo by advancing the king with discovered check. Question: how should black play? King a1. Or b5? The answer comes for the question, what is black playing for? Krush came up with the response king a1, which Kasparov later said he had considered as a dead draw. For the first time, however, the team voted against Krush and played b5. That's dubious. King f6? Krush now pushed for king c1. Yeah. Good move. It offered the best chances of holding a draw. Peter Karra's special computer program for the position continued with queen e4. Yeah. Good move. As queen f1. King e7. b4. And if queen takes b4, How must black play? Queen f5. The only move. And following. Queen c3. King b1. Queen f6. How must black play? Queen e4. Again, the only move. And after. King f7. What is black's strongest move? Queen c4. Yeah. Good move. And now for the final piece, after. King g7. How should black play? Black can draw with d5. Again, the only move that works. And in this case, enabling black to draw. Even against g6. Yeah. Good move. And after Queen g1. Queen f4. King d1. Yeah. Good move. As King f7. b3. The position is equal. And here, with Queen c4. Black has King d1. Queen d3. King c1. Ending in another drawn position. Now, here, how should black play? King b2. Or King a1. The team voted for King b2. Bad move. The idea was to use the king to support the b-pawn toward promotion, but it does not quite work. Kasparov continued with Queen h2. That's dubious. Giving black a chance to salvage the draw with accurate defense. So, how should black play? Following King a1. Queen f4. Black was still holding, but how should black continue? Queen d3. Queen d5. Or b4. Both Queen d3 and Queen d5 are playable, but not what the team voted for. b4. Bad move. Following. Queen takes b4. Queen f3. King g7. d5. Queen d4. King b1. g6. Here, how should the world team continue? Queen e4. Or Queen f5. Crush finally decided on Queen f5. But could not communicate her ideas in time to swing a vote. Queen e4. And after. Queen g1. King b2. Queen f2. King c1. King f6. d4. g7. It became apparent that pawn was unstoppable, and would promote. So, the world team resigned. The end.